The diner sat hunched beside the highway like a tired animal, its neon sign sputtering through the rain. The letters had once read the Silver Spoon, but now only Silv, SP, and glowed, buzzing faintly in the dark. Trucks thundered past without slowing. Inside, the air smelled of grease, burnt coffee, and the ghosts of better days. Nora Bennett stood behind the counter in a gray apron that might once have been white. The old stovetop hissed unevenly, one coil glowing bright red while the other struggled to catch up. She watched the light pulse like a dying ember and sighed. Her hands, still graceful despite the years of fatigue, lifted a half-frozen fish from a chipped metal tray. It had arrived that morning packed in melting ice. The flesh was dull, the eye cloudy, like everything else in this place. She laid it on the cutting board and began to clean it, knife moving in quiet rhythm. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence until the back door slammed open. Bennett. Frank Delaney's voice crashed through the kitchen. The owner's bulk filled the doorway, his face flushed with the permanent color of someone who shouted more than he spoke. "Where the hell's my cook? Oh, there you are." Nora didn't look up. She'd learned not to. "You hear about tonight?" he went on, wiping sweat from his forehead with a greasy rag. "Big shots from the city. Investors. They're comin' to see the property. I promised them dinner, real dinner, not that fried junk. So you're up, chef. Make it fancy. Something with fish. They like fish." He spat the word like it offended him. Nora nodded once, the way a soldier might acknowledge an order. Frank took her silence as agreement. "Good. They'll be here by 8, he said, already turning for the door. "And Bennett, make it taste like money." He laughed at his own joke and left, the screen door creaking behind him. The kitchen settled into stillness again. The exhaust fan buzzed weakly, dragging warm, smoky air through its clogged filters. On the shelves, dusty jars leaned at odd angles. Paprika faded to brown, salt clumped with humidity, an unmarked bottle of something amber and sticky. Nora wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist and looked around. This place had nothing to give. Yet somehow she was still here. She reached for her knife again and began to work, slow, steady, careful, as the storm outside thickened, and the neon letters flickered one by one, fighting to stay alive. The smell of raw fish and old oil faded into the background as Nora's mind drifted, unbidden, into the past. It always began the same way, with the sound of laughter and the clink of crystal glasses under warm Provence sunlight. La Lourde de Mer, her restaurant, her dream, had been alive with color and music. White linen, silver cutlery, lavender in glass vases. Guests spoke her name with admiration, sometimes even awe. Back then, she belonged to a world that shimmered like a mirage. She still remembered the way the servers whispered orders in French, how the scent of roasted sea bass mingled with thyme and lemon zest. She remembered applause, real applause, the night a food critic compared her menu to poetry. She'd smiled then, not knowing how fragile it all was. The memory turned, as it always did, toward the fire. It had started in the middle of the night. The crack of splitting timber, the hiss of smoke curling under doors. She'd run barefoot into the street, choking, watching orange light devour everything she'd built. The flames licked through her kitchen first, as if jealous of her art. By dawn, La Lourde de Mer was nothing but blackened beams and ash. The insurance should have saved her. But the papers, all the ownership, every clause, had been under her husband's name. Mark. Charming, clever Mark, who had promised her eternity and left her with ruin. He'd taken the payout, flown to Barcelona, and never looked back. Calls went unanswered. Letters returned unopened. He vanished as neatly as he had once arrived, leaving her to sift through the ashes alone. Nora reached absent-mindedly for the fish on the counter, her fingers brushing the cold, wet skin. She blinked, dragging herself back to the present. The diner's hum returned, the buzz of fluorescent light, the thud of rain on the window. Her reflection in the metal backsplash caught her eye. The faint, pale mark running down her left cheek, the scar the fire had left, glistened under the kitchen's dim light. Once, magazines had printed her portrait under the words, "The new star of French cuisine." Now that same face made people look away too quickly, embarrassed by their own pity. She washed her hands slowly, as if washing away the past. The water ran rusty brown before turning clear. There were no applause here, no silver cutlery, no mark. Just the hiss of the stove, the hum of the lights, and the faint promise of something, perhaps redemption, hidden beneath the weight of her memories. Nora exhaled and tightened her apron. Tonight she would cook again. Not for fame. Not for anyone's approval. Just to remember who she was. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left. No restaurant, no name, no future. Nora spent weeks sleeping on the couch of an old friend in Nice, surrounded by boxes of what little she'd salvaged. A set of knives, her chef's jacket, a photograph of her and Mark smiling in front of La Loire de Mer. Each morning, she would wake thinking the fire had been a nightmare. But reality was always waiting, heavy and unrelenting. She tried to rebuild. She sent resumes to restaurants across France, to colleagues who used to toast her success. Some never replied. Others offered polite refusals wrapped in empty words. When they saw her face in person, the scar that drew down her cheek like a whisper of flame, their smiles dimmed. Perhaps a role in the kitchen, but not visible, they would murmur. It wasn't the burn that disqualified her. It was what it represented. A reminder of disaster. Eventually, her savings evaporated. Pride followed soon after. One day she bought a one-way ticket home. The flight back felt longer than it should have. Hours of silence punctuated by her reflection in the airplane window. The ghost of the person she used to be. Her sister, Marianne, lived in a small coastal town. A place that smelled of salt, diesel, and fried dough. When Nora stepped off the bus, Marianne's face softened, though her eyes flickered with the same careful pity Nora had seen everywhere else. "You'll be all right," Marianne said, helping with her bags. "Just stay for a while. Breathe. You don't owe anyone anything." But Nora knew she owed herself something. A reason to wake up each morning. The only job she could find was at Delaney's Diner, a squat building by the highway where truckers came for coffee and cigarettes more than food. Frank Delaney had taken her on because he needed hands, not talent. "You can cook?" he'd asked, disinterested. When she nodded, he'd grunted. "Fine. Don't burn anything. That's the rule." And so she stayed. The days blurred together, frying eggs, wiping counters, scraping grease off pans older than she was. It wasn't work that demanded skill, but it demanded endurance. She found a strange comfort in the monotony. No critics, no cameras, no husband, no spotlight. Just the steady rhythm of survival. Sometimes, late at night after closing, she would sit alone in the diner's parking lot, listening to the highway hum. The stars out here were faint, drowned by the orange glare of passing trucks. Still, she looked for constellations, familiar shapes from another life, and wondered if she'd ever find her way back to the person she once was. In time, she stopped asking. The clock above the kitchen door ticked toward 7:30. Rain still beat against the windows, and the smell of wet asphalt drifted inside every time the door opened. Nora stood at her station, sleeves rolled, a knife in hand. The fish lay before her, dull-eyed, lifeless, but it would have to do. She exhaled slowly and began to work. The blade moved with the confidence of memory, not thought. Scales fell like silver dust, sliding into the sink. Her movements were economical, exact, no rush, no wasted effort. She had learned this rhythm long ago in Lyon, under a chef who used to say, "A knife doesn't cut food, it cuts time. Don't waste either." Even here in this dim, grimy kitchen, the old discipline returned. She set a pot of water to boil, reached for the remaining vegetables in the crate. A few onions soft at the edges, a carrot, a stub of celery. Nothing fine, nothing fresh. Yet her hands found ways to make them matter. She trimmed the rot, peeled away the dullness, and dropped the clean cores into the pot. Steam began to rise, ghostly and fragrant. The back door creaked, and Eli, the young waiter, poked his head inside. He couldn't have been older than 20, all nervous energy and awkward limbs. "Whoa," he said softly, eyes wide. "You're really cooking tonight." Nora didn't look up. "I need bay leaves. Black pepper. Anything that still smells alive." Eli stepped inside, scanning the shelves. "Bay leaves, ya somewhere." Alex, the other cook, he rearranged everything again before he bailed. Total chaos. He spoke quickly, words tumbling out. "You know he's been gone 3 days. Frank's losing it. We barely got any customers. Tips are a joke, and Nora cut in, her voice quiet but firm. Bay leaves Eli. Right. He rummaged through a box and pulled out a small jar, handing it to her like an offering. She opened it, inhaled, and nodded. Good. Now lemon. And if there's dry white wine not sweet, bring that too. Eli blinked. Wine? He hesitated, then shrugged. I'll see what I can find. He disappeared out the door. Nora stirred the pot. The water clouded with flavor. Onion skins, herbs, a pinch of salt. She watched it begin to shimmer, listening to the quiet bubble. Her face softened in the rising steam. It reminded her of mornings in her old kitchen. Sunlight spilling through tall windows, her staff laughing, the sound of knives tapping in rhythm. When Eli returned, breathless and proud, he held up a bottle and a lemon. Found em, he said. Had to steal the wine from Frank's stash. Nora smiled. The first real one in a long while. Then we'll make it worth it. She poured the wine into the pot, and the room filled with a scent that didn't belong here. Clean, sharp, and full of memory. Eli leaned against the counter, watching in silence. For the first time, the old diner kitchen seemed to breathe. Outside, the storm eased. Inside, something far quieter was beginning to awaken, not just in the pot, but in Nora herself. The air in the kitchen began to change. The smoke of burnt oil gave way to something new, gentle, clean, alive. Nora leaned over the pot, tasting with the precision of someone reacquainting herself with an old language. A pinch more salt, a whisper of pepper, the zest of the lemon Eli had found. Each adjustment was a conversation between memory and instinct. The broth shimmered like liquid glass, its surface trembling under the faint hiss of the burner. She added the fish, sliding it carefully into the pot as if returning it to the sea. For a moment, she watched it disappear beneath the steam and felt a calmness she hadn't known in years. Eli perched nearby on a stool, chin resting on his hand. I didn't know food could smell like that, he murmured. It's different. Like the ocean after a storm. Nora didn't answer right away. She stirred the soup slowly, eyes unfocused. Cooking, she said finally, isn't about food. It's about memory. You cook something right, and people remember the taste long after they've forgotten your name. Eli nodded, though she doubted he fully understood. But he watched her with that quiet reverence of someone witnessing magic for the first time. The old clock struck 8. Somewhere beyond the kitchen doors, Nora heard the rumble of voices. The investors had arrived. The low hum of conversation, the scrape of chairs, the clink of glass. Frank's laughter rose above it all, loud and false. She didn't rush. Instead, she began the final steps with almost ritual care. She sliced a few herbs, what little was fresh, and scattered them across the bowls. The aroma deepened, filling every corner of the diner. It slipped through the cracks in the door and drifted into the main room, wrapping itself around the men in their expensive suits and tired eyes. Nora caught her reflection in a metal tray, hair tucked back, scar glimmering faintly under the harsh fluorescent light. There was no glamour left, but there was truth. And in that truth, something steady and proud. Eli came closer, lowering his voice. They're asking for food, he whispered. Then let's give them something worth remembering, Nora replied. He lifted the tray carefully, the bowls trembling as he carried them out. The kitchen door swung closed behind him, and Nora stood alone again. She leaned against the counter, eyes closed, listening to the faint echo of spoons clinking in the next room. It had been years since her food reached anyone beyond survival. Now, with nothing but scraps and instinct, she'd managed to summon the scent of the sea. A small miracle in a forgotten place. And though she didn't know it yet, that aroma would change everything. In the diner's main room, 6 men sat around the largest booth, their jackets dark against the cracked vinyl seats. The table was cluttered with maps and papers, the kind marked with red lines and hand-drawn circles. Their voices carried that calm, sharp tone of people used to moving money rather than lifting anything heavier than a pen. Frank Delaney hovered near them, his shirt clinging to his back with sweat. He laughed too loudly at his own small jokes, his eyes flicking constantly between the door to the kitchen and the men's unreadable faces. Gentlemen, he said, gesturing broadly. You picked the right spot. Best location on this whole stretch of road. Once the new bypass opens, the traffic'll double. I can guarantee it. And the land flat solid, ready to build. One of the men, the oldest, with silver hair and the stillness of authority, tapped the map with a pen. It's promising, he said. But the access road is narrow. Trucks might have trouble turning. Another man, younger with tired eyes, replied, the council can widen it. I've got a contact who owes me a favor. Frank nodded eagerly. Exactly. Easy fix. No problem too big if you know the right hands to shake, right? He laughed again, but the investors didn't. Their attention shifted as the kitchen door creaked open. Eli emerged with the tray, balancing the bowls of fish stew, steam rising in delicate curls. The men fell quiet as he placed the dishes before them. For a long moment no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the clatter of rain against the windows. Then the oldest man lifted his spoon and tasted. His brow furrowed slightly. Another followed. Then another. Frank stood stiff, forcing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Homemade, he said quickly. My family recipe. Simple but hearty. No one answered. The silence deepened, but it wasn't disapproval. It was something else. Something Frank didn't recognize. Finally, one of the younger men, the one with restless hands and an expensive watch, set his spoon down carefully. That's, he began, then paused, searching for the word. Remarkable. The man with silver hair nodded slowly. There's a clarity to it. Pure. No excess. He looked up at Frank. Who made this? Frank froze for a heartbeat, his mind scrambling. Just my cook. A helper. Not important. What matters is. We'd like to meet them, the silver-haired man interrupted. His tone left no room for refusal. Frank swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. The laughter drained from his face. Of course, he said, voice tight. Right away. As he turned toward the kitchen, his footsteps echoed louder than they should have. He could feel the weight of their silence behind him. And underneath it, a shift he couldn't quite name. Something slipping from his grasp. In the kitchen, Nora straightened as the door burst open. Frank's face was pale, his breath fast. What the hell did you put in that soup? He hissed. They're asking for you. You. What did you do to them? Nora didn't flinch. She set down her ladle and met his eyes calmly. I cooked, she said. Frank's jaw tightened. He pointed toward the door. Then go explain yourself. And with that, the balance of power in Delaney's diner began to tilt. Quietly, irreversibly. The diner's main room fell silent when Nora stepped out from the kitchen. The hum of the ceiling fan seemed to stop mid-turn. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Some curious, some puzzled. One or two already knowing there was something different about this woman with the calm gaze and the burn scar catching the light. Frank trailed behind her, red-faced and twitching with nerves. Here she is, he said, his voice forced and too loud. Our cook. Nora Bennett. Nora wiped her hands on her apron, then clasped them loosely in front of her. The investors' table felt a world away, though only a few steps separated them. The silver-haired man, the one who had spoken with quiet authority earlier, leaned forward. You made the soup, he said. Not a question. Yes, she replied simply. He nodded, studying her face as though flipping through the pages of memory. It's extraordinary, he said. Simple, clean, but it tastes of something older. Something I haven't found in years. Frank shifted awkwardly, eager to reclaim attention. She just followed my family recipe, he said quickly, chuckling. Lucky guess, right? But the man wasn't listening to him anymore. He was still watching Nora, his expression sharpening with sudden realization. Wait, he murmured. I've seen you before. The others glanced at him. In Marseille, he continued slowly. La Lueur de Mer. You cooked there, didn't you? Nora hesitated. For a brief second the air seemed to thicken. Then she gave a small, quiet nod. I did. The man's eyes widened, then softened with something like wonder. You're that Nora Bennett. I knew it. I proposed to my wife after your dinner. Monkfish with lavender sauce. I've never forgotten that night. A flicker of color rose in Nora's cheeks. Around the table, the other investors looked between them, murmuring. Recognition rippled like a current. Frank's mouth opened, but no words came out. His entire act of ownership, the confident swagger, the false claims, cracked in an instant. The silver-haired man pushed back his chair and began to applaud, slow but firm. "Gentlemen," he said, glancing around, "you're in the presence of one of the finest chefs I've ever encountered." The others joined in, their clapping hesitant at first, then steady. The sound filled the diner, echoing against the faded walls. Nora stood still, the applause washing over her like a strange, forgotten tide. Frank shrank against the counter, color draining from his face. The silver-haired man turned back to her. "Tell me," he said softly, "how does someone like you end up here?" Nora met his gaze. "Sometimes life burns everything you build," she said. "And sometimes it gives you a stove and a second chance." He smiled faintly, nodding as though that answer was exactly right. "Well," he said, standing, "if you'll allow it, I'd like to make sure that second chance is worthy of you." And for the first time in years, Nora didn't look away. After the investors left, the diner felt different, as though the air itself had been rearranged. The scent of broth still lingered, faint and sweet, clinging to the walls. Eli was wiping down the counter in silence, sneaking glances at Nora every few seconds, as if afraid she might disappear. Frank was in the corner, pacing. His tie hung loose, his face slick with sweat. The humbleness he had tried to fake at the table was gone now. What remained was panic. "They're coming back tomorrow," he said, voice sharp. "You hear me? Tomorrow. And they want you cooking." He stopped and turned toward her. "So now you're the star, huh? Think you can just walk in here and take over?" Nora didn't look up from the cutting board where she was cleaning her knife. "I didn't ask for that." "No, you didn't," Frank snapped. "But you made me look like a fool. They think you're some kind of legend." What was I supposed to say? That my cook used to have her name in newspapers while I sell burgers by the highway? Eli froze mid-wipe. The sound of rain outside filled the silence between them. Nora set down her knife and turned slowly. "Frank," she said, calm but steady, "you didn't look like a fool because of me. You looked like a fool because you lied." His jaw clenched. "You think they're going to save you? Those suits? They'll forget your name again as soon as they've eaten their fill." He leaned closer, his breath thick with coffee and fear. "You're nothing but a ghost in an apron." Eli stepped forward. "Hey," he said quietly, "back off." Frank glared at him. "Stay out of this, kid." Nora didn't move. Her voice was low, almost gentle. "You're right about one thing, Frank. I am a ghost. But sometimes ghosts don't disappear. They haunt the places that tried to bury them." Frank's mouth opened, then closed again. Something in her tone, something colder than anger, quieter than threat, seemed to drain the fight from him. He muttered under his breath and stormed toward his office, slamming the door behind him. For a moment, only the sound of the rain remained. Eli exhaled. "You really think they'll come back?" Nora nodded slightly. "Yes. Not for him. For the food." He smiled. "So what happens now?" She looked down at her hands, the small burn scars, the thin white line on her wrist from years of knives and heat. "Now," she said softly, "we start over. From the ashes, like always." She turned off the stove, the last hiss of steam fading into quiet. Outside, the storm had finally broken. The clouds thinned, revealing a slice of pale dawn over the Black Sea. Nora stood for a moment, watching it through the diner window. The faint line of light growing stronger by the second. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The next morning, the world felt rinsed clean. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles that mirrored the pale sky. The diner stood quiet under the soft wash of dawn. A tired old building that, for the first time in years, smelled like promise. Nora arrived early. She let herself in through the back door, flicked on the lights, and breathed in the faint scent of lemon and broth still clinging to the air. Her hands moved automatically. Apron, stove, water, knives, the rhythm of purpose returning with every motion. She hadn't slept much. The conversation with the investors replayed in her mind in broken pieces. The applause, the man's words, the way her name had sounded when spoken without pity. But beneath it all was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hunger. Not for food, but for creation. For life. Eli showed up not long after, still half asleep, a paper bag in his hands. "Brought coffee," he said, stifling a yawn. Thought you might need it. Nora smiled. You thought right. She poured 2 cups, handed him one, and turned back to the stove. He hesitated. You think they'll really come back? The investors, I mean. They will, she said, lighting the burner. People always return to where they tasted something honest. He nodded, though his brow furrowed. And Frank? Nora paused, then shrugged. Frank will do what he's always done. Chase what he doesn't understand. As if summoned, the man himself appeared in the doorway. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes rimmed red from a sleepless night. We open in 15, he muttered. He didn't look at her. Then you'd better set the tables, Nora said without turning. Something in her tone made him obey without argument. The morning rush began slowly. Truckers first, locals next. But the scent of Nora's cooking spread through town quicker than gossip. By 9 o'clock, the diner was full. People leaned over their plates, whispering, "What's different today?" Nora moved among them like a conductor, quiet but certain. Every plate that left her hands was simple. Eggs, stew, bread. But each carried the careful weight of her touch. The clatter of cutlery became a kind of music. At the far end of the counter, Eli watched, grinning. They love it, he said. You can feel it. Nora didn't answer. She only kept cooking, lost in the rhythm. Heat, scent, color, taste. It was as if every breath drew her closer to the person she used to be. Yet freer somehow, unbound by the perfection that had once imprisoned her. Outside, the sun climbed higher, spilling gold through the diner windows. Frank stood near the register, watching the growing crowd with a look that mixed resentment and awe. For now he said nothing. And for the first time since the fire, Nora felt no need to look back. The day was hers. The kitchen was alive. And the ashes she'd carried for so long, quietly, invisibly, had finally begun to bloom into flame. By the time the train hissed into the station, the morning had softened into a gentle gray light. Nora sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a folded linen handkerchief, the familiar weight of anticipation pressing against her chest. Outside, the landscape rolled past in muted waves. Fields, scattered cottages, and the occasional winding road disappearing into fog. She thought of the diner, of Eli's wide-eyed admiration, of the quiet strength she had rediscovered in a place she had once considered beneath her. She thought of Frank, of his faltering authority, and of the 6 men in dark suits whose recognition had lifted her from the dust. Her sister had hugged her tightly at the station, neither speaking for a long moment. When she finally whispered, it was barely audible. Don't be afraid anymore. You've survived everything. Nora had nodded, letting the silence speak for her gratitude. Eli had run up just as the train's whistle blew. I wish I could go too, he said, breathless. I want to learn, to cook like you, to make people feel the way I did today. She smiled, laying a hand on his shoulder. Then start here. Practice. Watch. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. The train lurched forward, and she leaned against the glass. The rhythm of the rails was hypnotic, steady and sure. It was a rhythm she could trust. Behind her, the familiar sense of smoke, grease and lemon faded, replaced by the crisp promise of autumn air. Ahead, a new city awaited. A new kitchen, a new challenge, and a place where her skill, her history, and her passion would matter. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile fully. No one could define her anymore. No scars, no failures, no burned dreams could dictate her path. The world was wide open. Fields blurred into villages, villages into highways, and highways into possibilities. Nora's fingers tightened around the handkerchief, and she closed her eyes. She didn't need to know the future, only that she was moving toward it, toward herself. And somewhere in that forward motion, she felt the quiet, unshakable certainty that she had survived, not just to remember who she was, but to become who she was meant to be, unstoppable, unafraid, and ready. The train rolled on, carrying her past the fog, past the ashes, and into the fire of her next journey.